I never thought I'd hear news like that from my own son. Not in a million years. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring, the kind of day where the air already carried that mountain warmth even before noon. I was in my workshop sanding down a plank for a porch repair, sawdust floating in little golden clouds under the light. My old radio played quietly some blues guitar drifting from the local station. It was ordinary, peaceful. Then the phone rang. The screen lit up Derek, my son. I remember I smiled when I saw his name. He hadn't called me in weeks. He'd been busy, as he always put it, busy with clients, busy with projects, busy with his life. But still, he was my son, and I always answered. "Dad, I wanted to tell you something." His voice had that edge, rushed but not joyful, like he was checking something off a list. We got married. For a moment, my brain didn't even register the words. Married. My son was 27. He'd been seeing Aubrey for a while, sure, but there had been no talk of proposals, no talk of a wedding date, no mention of planning. And yet here, it was done. Finished, already sealed. He didn't invite me, didn't even tell me. The truth landed with a dull thud in my chest. I thought of all the times I'd imagined walking him down the aisle, standing proud as his best man, maybe raising a glass to toast the beginning of his new life. Those pictures shattered in an instant, and in their place was a gray emptiness. Before I could even sort out the words, he went on. Also, about the house. I can still hear the way he said it, like it was the next bullet point on an agenda. The house. My house. He wanted me to sign it over. Not later, not after I was gone, but now. "It's just early inheritance, Dad," he said quickly before I could even protest. "Makes sense with us building equity starting out married life, right?" I didn't respond right away. I just let the words hang there, echoing in my head. Married without telling me, demanding the deed to the home I'd built with my own hands, not asking politely, not inviting me into the conversation, demanding. My workshop suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in. I set the sandpaper down, carefully brushing sawdust from my palms. My heart was pounding, but not the kind of pounding you feel when you're scared. It was heavier than that, heavier and colder, like a weight sitting right behind the ribs. That house wasn't just lumber and shingles. It was my life. I bought it as a teardown when I was 33, back when I was still running wire as an electrician for other men's projects. Every paycheck, I set aside a little. Every weekend, I worked on it. Replacing joists, pouring concrete, climbing up on the roof when the rain rolled in sideways from the Blue Ridge. It wasn't just a home, it was proof. Proof that a man who grew up in a rented duplex, who wore hand-me-downs and ate beans 3 nights a week, could one day stand on his own ground. And now my son wanted me to hand it over like it was some starter kit for a lifestyle he thought he deserved. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. That's not my way. I just listened as he kept talking, listing reasons why it made sense, why it was smart, why it was practically owed to him. My hand rested on the stair rail beside me, the same rail I'd sanded smooth 20 years ago, the one Derek used to slide down in his socks when he was little. I remembered his laughter then. I remembered building him a treehouse in the backyard, his eyes lighting up like fireworks when he climbed inside. Somewhere along the way, I'd confused giving him everything with teaching him anything. He kept speaking, but I'd already stopped listening. I was too busy hearing the silence between us, the years of distance I'd tried to bridge with tuition checks and car payments and easy forgiveness. And now this, married without me, and within days reaching for the only thing that mattered most. When the call ended, I stood there for a long while. The radio had gone to static. Sawdust still floated in the air, but it seemed grayer, heavier. I brushed at my chest without thinking, like I could clear the ache the way I cleared the dust. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair by the window, looking out at the porch lights casting their warm glow across the yard. I thought about how many nights I'd stood there watching Derek shoot hoops in the driveway, the rhythm of the ball echoing into the twilight. I thought about the promise I'd made myself when he was born, that he would never feel the kind of lack I grew up with, that he would know stability, security, home. And now, at 27, he was throwing that promise back at me, saying it wasn't enough, saying I owed him more. It wasn't the house he wanted. Not really. It was validation, proof that he could leapfrog the years of sweat and calluses, skip straight to the part where life looked polished. But I knew better. You can't inherit grit. You can't be handed character with a deed. I didn't call him back. I didn't chase. I just remembered every word. And as the night stretched on and the silence settled deeper, a thought began to take root. If Derek thought he was owed something, maybe it was time to show him what inheritance really meant. Not just in dollars and walls, but in the values a man leaves behind. The kind of inheritance you can't sell. Before I tell you what I did next, I want you to understand this wasn't anger speaking. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Pure, heavy clarity, the kind that only comes when the people you love cut so deep you realize you're not bleeding. You're awake. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out the worn leather notebook I keep for important matters. Across the top of a blank page, I wrote 4 words, what really matters most. That's where the plan began. When I was growing up, the word home was more of an idea than a reality. We rented half of a duplex on the edge of town paint, peeling steps, loose, drafty windows that whistled in the winter. My father was long gone by then, and my mother did what she could, cleaning houses. There wasn't any talk about mortgages or property taxes. Owning a house was something other people did, people on the nicer side of town with trimmed hedges and lawns that weren't just patches of dirt and weeds. Back then, I swore if I ever had kids, they'd have more than walls that barely held together. They'd have a place they could point to and say, "That's ours." At 17, I started my apprenticeship as an electrician. I still remember my first day pulling cable in a half-finished grocery store. My hands were blistered before lunch, my knees bruised by night. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that would last. I carried that tool belt everywhere, heavier than it needed to be, but a kind of armor. When you grow up without much, sometimes a tool in your hand feels like the only proof you belong. Years passed. I moved from helper to journeyman to master. Long hours, rain-soaked job sites call-outs at 2 a.m. when a breaker fried and a store needed power back before sunrise. I said yes to every overtime shift because every dollar meant one step closer to something permanent. When I turned 33, I signed papers on the cheapest property I could find, a sagging house on a lot in Asheville hidden behind overgrown trees. Most people saw a liability. I saw a blank slate. It took me 10 years. 10 years of weekends with a hammer in my hand, paint on my jeans, dust in my lungs. I replaced every joist, poured a new foundation slab in the back, tore out the rot room by room. I built cabinets from scratch, laid tile by hand-framed windows to catch the sunrise. The day I finally moved in, I stood barefoot in the living room boards, warm underfoot, and thought, this is what home feels like. It wasn't just shelter, it was proof. By then, Derek was 5. I can still picture him sitting on the porch steps while I worked a Tonka truck, at his feet, peanut butter on his cheek. He'd watch me swing the hammer, his small body leaning forward like he wanted to catch every motion. Sometimes he'd ask, "Can I help?" I'd hand him a scrap piece of wood and a nail, watch him bang away with a plastic hammer until he got bored. That house raised him as much as I did. Every corner held a piece of our story. The growth marks I carved into the kitchen doorway each year, measuring his height. The squeaky stair he always tried to skip, convinced it was a secret trap. The treehouse I built in the back oak, where he and his friends camped with flashlights, whispering late into the night. But somewhere along the way, I blurred the line between giving him a better life and shielding him from reality. See, when you grow up with nothing, you want your kids to never know that hunger, that fear of eviction, that sting of being the poor one. So I said yes. Private soccer leagues, even though the fees made me wince. The latest video game consoles, brand name sneakers, new iPhones every other year. I told myself I could afford it, and I could. What I didn't realize was that with every yes, I was teaching him something I hadn't meant to. I thought I was giving him stability. What I gave him was expectation. By the time he was in high school, Derek carried himself like the world owed him more. College only reinforced that idea. While I was proud to pay his tuition, he treated it as his due, not a gift. When he maxed out a credit card at 23, I bailed him out. When he leased a car he couldn't afford, I co-signed. Each time I thought, this will be the last time. He'll learn. But he didn't learn. Why would he? I remember one small moment that should have been a warning. I'd lent him my nail gun for a project he swore he was working on. Months passed. Every time I asked about it, he waved me off. "I'll bring it back, Dad." When I finally went to his apartment and found it sitting in the corner, dust-covered and unused, I realized he didn't value what wasn't hard-won. That nail gun had been mine for years, paid for in sweat. To him, it was just another thing. Looking back now, I see how clear the pattern was. Derek didn't understand the difference between having and earning, between possession and pride. And it's not that he was a bad kid. He had his moments of kindness, his flashes of humor, his times when he hugged me unexpectedly. But those moments were fewer as Aubrey came into the picture. Aubrey Sinclair. She was polished in a way that felt foreign to me. All curated smiles, every photo staged like a magazine spread. She had a way of talking about aesthetic and vibes that made my calloused hands feel even rougher. She wasn't unkind exactly, but she carried herself like someone always measuring, always aware of the image being projected. Derek adored her, and I could see why she represented the life he thought he wanted: sleek, effortless, always camera-ready. What I didn't see, then what I only understood much later, was that together they were building a world made of glass. Shiny on the outside, fragile underneath. So when he called me that Tuesday morning to say he'd married her in secret, I shouldn't have been surprised. The secrecy wasn't about intimacy, it was about optics. No messy father in work boots, no house with squeaky stairs. Just a courthouse wedding, curated photos, the image of control. And then immediately the demand for the house. My house. To him, it wasn't history. It wasn't blood and calluses. It was just equity, leverage, a stepping stone. I set down my coffee mug that morning and looked around the kitchen. The worn cabinets, the dent in the fridge door where Derek once swung a baseball bat indoors, the scratch on the counter from a school project gone wrong. Every mark told a story. Stories I had lived, stories I had given. And suddenly I knew this wasn't just about refusing him. It was about redefining what inheritance meant. Because inheritance isn't about giving away everything you've built. It's about giving away the one thing that can't be sold. The values behind the walls. The grit behind the beams. Derek didn't understand that yet, but he was going to. It was 2 weeks after that phone call when I finally saw the pictures. I wasn't told, of course. I stumbled onto them. A neighbor's daughter who follows Aubrey on Instagram showed me one evening as I was fixing her porch light. "Isn't this your son, Mr. Cole?" she asked, tilting her phone toward me. And there it was. Derek in a tailored gray suit, Aubrey in a lace dress that looked straight out of some styled bridal shoot, both standing in front of the Savannah courthouse steps. Sunlight was hitting them just right. A golden filter wrapped the whole scene in that glossy perfection people pay influencers to fake. The caption read, "Forever starts today. Simple chic, just us." No family in the frame, no father standing nearby, just them curated and controlled. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the carousel of photos. Aubrey's hand raised the diamond ring glinting. Derek kissing her cheek, tagged brands for her dress, her shoes, even the florist. They'd turned their wedding into content. A moment that for me should have been about bonds and vows and tears in the eyes of family had been reduced to hashtags and partnerships. And in the comments, their friends praised the minimalist elegance, called it old money taste, so tasteful to keep it private. Private. That word burned. It wasn't private, they just didn't want me there. I set the phone back down, thanked the girl, and walked home in silence. The porch light I had just fixed glowed warm, but I felt cold to the bone. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the empty chair across from me. I imagined Derek there eating pizza after soccer practice, laughing about some prank at school. How did we get from that boy to this man who thought it better to hide his father than to invite him into the biggest day of his life? It wasn't long after that Aubrey sent me a message herself. A text short and polished like she was writing a press release. "We'll have a bigger ceremony later, something photogenic. Hope you understand." Something photogenic. Not meaningful, not intimate. Photogenic. I didn't reply. There were no words that would have mattered. A week later, Derek called again. His tone was nervous, but dressed up in confidence like a salesman about to pitch. He said they'd been talking about their future, and since they were married now, it made sense for them to settle down. He said the house, my house, was perfect for them. He called it an early inheritance, like he was doing me a favor by asking now instead of later. He dressed it up in talk of equity building, establishing roots, and a long-term investment in family stability. But underneath the fancy phrases, it was plain he wanted me to sign the deed over to him and Aubrey. I listened quietly. He thought my silence meant I was considering it, but what it really meant was that my heart was breaking all over again. Because here's the truth of inheritance. At least the way I'd always thought about it comes when a life is finished, When a parent has passed, and the house, the land, the savings, all of it becomes a gift to carry forward. It's the closing of one chapter and the start of another. It isn't meant to be demanded while the parent is still alive, still walking the room, still pouring coffee at the same table. It isn't meant to be taken out of your hands while you're still using it to live. After he hung up, I walked the property circling the yard under a rising moon. The air smelled of cut grass and damp earth. Every corner held some memory. The oak tree where Derek once tied a rope swing. The shed where he helped me hold boards steady while I hammered. The cracked sidewalk where he'd skinned his knees, learning to ride his bike. Did he not remember those things, or had he buried them under Aubrey's curated filters and a hunger for the life she promised him? It hit me then that to Derek and Aubrey, the house wasn't history. It wasn't memory. It wasn't proof of labor and love. It was just leverage, a financial instrument, a way to appear more established, more polished, more... What did they call it? Oh yes, old money. But no deed in the world can buy history. No transfer of property can make you what you're not. I didn't sleep again that night. My thoughts kept circling back not to anger, but to clarity. I realized that Derek's decision to marry in secret wasn't just about convenience. It was about optics. They didn't want me in the photos, in the frame, in their curated story. I was a liability to their image. And now they wanted to use the very home I built as a prop in that story. The more I thought about it, the more I saw the pattern. Derek had grown up believing money appeared when he needed it, that debts could be erased with a phone call to Dad, that stability was guaranteed no matter how recklessly he moved. Aubrey had only magnified that belief, feeding him the language of entitlement wrapped in aesthetics. They weren't asking for the house. They were assuming it was theirs. That realization hurt more than anything. It meant Derek didn't see me as the man who built it, who paid every mortgage bill, who climbed roofs in rainstorms and patched drywall until midnight. He saw me as a gatekeeper to what he thought was already owed to him. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook again. Under the words "what really matters most," I started a list. It wasn't about bills or deeds. It was about values. Things I wanted Derek to inherit, but hadn't managed to teach him yet. Pride in honest work. Respect for what's been earned. Gratitude for what's given. Responsibility for your own choices. The kind of inheritance that can't be photographed for likes. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I had to make a move. If I kept enabling him, I'd lose him completely. If I let him take the house, I'd be feeding the very weakness that was hollowing him out. Inheritance wasn't supposed to rot the soul. It was supposed to strengthen it. I looked out the window at the silhouette of the house against the night sky. My house, my life's work. And I whispered to myself, not like this. He won't take it like this. It was then the seed of a plan began to form, not out of spite, but out of love, sharpened into something harder, a lesson. A lesson I hadn't managed to teach him with gifts or comfort. A lesson he would only understand when he realized that sometimes you don't get what you want because what you want isn't what you need. After that call, I knew I couldn't just take Derek at his word. Something in the way he rushed through his pitch, in the way Aubrey's text focused more on photogenic than family, told me there was more beneath the surface. So I did what I've always done when faced with uncertainty. I went looking for the truth. When Derek was younger, I still had access to a lot of his accounts. Some of that access lingered even after he turned 25, mostly from times I'd co-signed or helped him out. A credit line here, a utility bill there. It wasn't snooping. It was responsibility. The ties weren't fully severed, and when he asked for help, I stepped in. Now those old connections gave me a window I hadn't expected to use. I pulled what I could, statements, records, small details that painted a bigger picture. What I saw made my chest tighten. Derek and Aubrey were drowning. Over $246,000 in combined consumer debt. Multiple cards at luxury department stores, some maxed to their limits. Buy now, pay later installments for furniture and decor, designer chairs, imported rugs, even dishes branded by some influencer collaboration. There was a leased Range Rover with payments well past due. And then there was the so-called business, a limited liability company Derek had set up 18 months earlier. He'd called it a consultancy, though I never saw him consult anyone except Aubrey on what filter to use. The records showed purchases for camera gear, studio, lighting a drone, even a brand retreat in Palm Springs that had cost nearly $9,000 for flights and accommodations, revenue less than $2,000 in total. It was a hollow shell dressed up to look like success. As I scrolled through line after line of their spending, I thought about all the nights I ate peanut butter sandwiches just to afford another load of lumber. I thought about the years I drove a used pickup with the floorboards rusted through so I could save for drywall and shingles. Every purchase of theirs looked like a shiny shortcut, an attempt to leapfrog the grind that builds real stability. Then came the screenshots. Aubrey's public social media was already a highlight reel, but her private posts told more. Photos from work trips that were really vacations, luxury handbags stacked on hotel beds, captions about manifesting abundance paired with sponsored hashtags. She and Derek posed in their rented apartment like it was a magazine spread every corner curated. Yet behind the scenes, they were paying minimums on 17 credit accounts and living off advances they couldn't cover. I sat back in my chair, pressing my palms against my eyes until I saw sparks. My son wasn't just careless, he was reckless. And worse, he believed appearances mattered more than foundations. But then, I found something that hit even harder. A statement from a boutique jeweler downtown. Derek had financed Aubrey's engagement ring. Not just financed, it was on a 12-year payment plan. 12 years for a piece of jewelry he couldn't truly afford to maintain an image of wealth he hadn't earned. That was when the full picture came into view. The marriage in secret, the rush, the demand for my house. It wasn't about family. It was about survival. They weren't trying to build equity. They were trying to bail out a sinking ship with a golden bucket. My house was their lifeline. The realization left me cold. For years, I thought I'd been helping Derek by stepping in, covering gaps, smoothing over rough edges. But all I'd done was teach him that there would always be a safety net, that he could leap into debt and someone else would catch him before he hit the ground. Now he thought the net should be the only thing I truly owned. I closed the laptop and went outside. The air was cool, the kind of crisp mountain breeze that smells faintly of pine and earth. I walked the property slowly, letting the truth settle in. Every brick, every shingle, every inch of the home was something I had sweated for. I imagined Derek and Aubrey here, filling the house with their curated photos, hosting parties where they pretended to be something they weren't. I imagined my walls becoming props, my porch just another background for filters. It made me sick. But underneath the anger was something quieter. Sadness. Sadness that my son had confused inheritance with entitlement. Sadness that Aubrey had turned him further from his roots. Sadness that I had let my desire to give him more rob him of the lessons that mattered. I thought of the boy who once ran barefoot through the yard, hair sticking to his forehead, laughing as I lifted him onto my shoulders. Where had that boy gone? When did he trade laughter for appearances, joy for image, honesty for debt? As I walked back inside, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't give him the house. Not like this. Not when it would only dig him deeper into the illusion he was living. But what could I do that would reach him? What could I do that would force him to see the truth, that inheritance isn't something you demand, it's something you earn by how you live? The question circled in my mind like a hawk over an open field, and slowly, I began to sense the answer. If Derek thought inheritance was about possessions, maybe I needed to show him it was about something bigger, something that couldn't be flipped for profit or used to impress strangers online. I picked up my notebook again, flipping back to the page where I had written what really matters most. Underneath the 4 values I'd listed, I added a 5th. Legacy built in service, not selfishness. I didn't know what form it would take yet, but I knew the path forward wouldn't be about saying no quietly. It would be about making a choice so visible, so final, that Derek would have no choice but to confront the reality he had been avoiding. The kind of choice you can't walk back. Once the truth sat heavy in my chest, I knew doing nothing wasn't an option. If I ignored Derek's demand, he would circle back with more pressure. If I gave in, I would lose everything I had built. And worse, I would be teaching him that entitlement always wins. So I went looking for a way forward, not a reaction, a decision, something final. The next morning, I called my attorney, Evelyn Cho. She'd been handling my affairs for nearly 15 years. Evelyn was the kind of lawyer who never wasted words, sharp, practical, and unafraid to tell me when I was being stubborn. If there was a way to protect the house, she'd know. I sat in her office across a wide oak desk, the blinds half drawn against the midday sun. She flipped through my notes, my questions, the file of bank statements I'd printed out about Derek and Aubrey. She took her time, eyes scanning with that lawyer's patience. Then she set her pen down. Reishi said gently, "You need to understand something. If you want to keep this house from ever falling into the wrong hands, you need to make an irrevocable choice. Not a promise, not a plan, something that can't be undone." The word stuck with me, irrevocable. I asked what that looked like. She laid it out in simple terms. "You can put the house into a charitable remainder trust. You'll retain the right to live here for the rest of your life. That's called a life estate. But when your time comes, the property will go directly to the charity you name. No debate, no challenge, no family dispute. It bypasses inheritance squabbles altogether." I sat back in my chair, letting the idea wash over me. The house wouldn't just stay safe, it would carry forward with purpose. "What kind of charity?" I asked. "That's up to you," she said. "Education, community, development, whatever matters most to you." Her words lit a spark. I thought about the years I spent as an apprentice, the tools that felt like lifelines in my hands. I thought about the boys and girls in this town who couldn't afford college, who were written off because they didn't fit the academic mold. Skilled trades had given me my life, my home, my dignity. Why not give that same chance to others? That night, I called an old friend, Dean Marta Ruiz at Blue Ridge Community College. Marta had been running the trades program for decades, fighting year after year for funding. I asked her what the program needed most. She didn't hesitate. Scholarships, tools, stipends for kids who can't afford to give up working while they train. We lose too many good ones because they can't balance both. The picture became clear. My house could become a fund, a pipeline, a way to put real tools into real hands. A legacy not of square footage, but of futures. I told Marta I'd be in touch soon with more details. Then I hung up and called Pastor Briggs, who ran a nonprofit that partnered with the college. He'd spent years fighting for housing and apprenticeship programs for at-risk youth. He understood better than most what this could mean. When I explained what I was considering, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Ray, if you do this, it's going to change lives. But you also know your son will see it as a betrayal." "I know," I said quietly, "but maybe it's the only way he'll understand what real inheritance looks like." The next step was harder. I reached out to a reporter, Janelle Hart from WNC7. I'd seen her cover community stories with honesty, no flash, no sensationalism. I told her I had an announcement to make that the public might care about. I could hear the curiosity in her pause. When I hinted it involved a major donation, she said she'd bring a crew. Piece by piece, the plan took shape. I would invite Derek and Aubrey to meet me at the county register's office. I'd tell them it was about the house, about settling things formally. They'd come expecting me to sign over the deed. What they wouldn't expect was that I'd already decided where the house would go, and it wasn't to them. It would go into the trust, effective immediately, irrevocable, signed, sealed, and recorded in the same building where property deeds had passed hands for generations. But this time, the handoff would be to the future. It wasn't about humiliating my son. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. He needed to see that inheritance isn't something you demand. It's something you build, something you give. And sometimes the best way to teach that is by taking away the illusion of ownership altogether. For days leading up to it, I walked the house, touching the walls, the stair rails, the door frames. I whispered my memories into them, almost like I was saying goodbye, even though I wasn't leaving. The difference was subtle, but enormous. The house would no longer be mine to give away. It would belong to a cause bigger than me. That thought brought me peace. I also felt fear, of course. Fear of Derek's anger, Aubrey's inevitable scorn, the rift that might never heal. But as I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling beams I had once lifted into place with my own hands, I knew this was the only way. Because when love fails to teach, consequence has to step in. I called Evelyn one last time to confirm the paperwork. She assured me every word was in order, every signature line prepared. Once I signed, the property would be out of reach forever. "Are you sure, Ray?" she asked again. "This isn't something you can undo." "I'm sure," I said, because that's the point. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. I thought of Derek as a boy, swinging from the oak tree, laughing without care. I thought of him now, buried under debt and appearances. And I thought of the apprentices who would one day stand in workshops, sparks flying from welders' hands, gripping tools with purpose, lives changed because one house became more than a house. I didn't know if Derek would ever forgive me, but I knew without question that I could live with that. Because sometimes the best gift a father can give is not what his children want, but what they need. And what Derek needed most was a lesson written in ink that could never be erased. The morning of the meeting, I woke before dawn. I didn't need an alarm. My body was wired with a kind of restless certainty. I brewed coffee, black and strong, and sat at the kitchen table with the deed papers neatly tucked into my leather notebook. Outside, the sky was still dark, the mountain air cool against the windows. I thought about all the mornings I'd started from this table heading to job sites with my thermos and tool belt. Back then, I was building walls and wiring circuits. Today, I was building something less tangible but far more permanent. By 9 a.m., I was downtown at the county register's office. Evelyn was already there, calm and efficient, her briefcase resting neatly on her lap as she checked her watch. Beside her sat Dean Marta Ruiz. Eyes bright, hands folded, the excitement of possibility radiating from her. Pastor Briggs soon followed, his presence steady, grounding like he'd carried 100 burdens heavier than this one. And then came the camera crew from WNC7. Janelle Hart greeted me with a firm handshake, her microphone tucked under one arm, her cameraman already scanning for angles. She promised me they'd record the entire proceeding, beginning to end. No edits, no filters. The truth exactly as it unfolded. That was all I wanted. At 2:20, my phone buzzed. A text from Derek running a few minutes late. Be there soon. Of course they were late, always on their own schedule as though the world was expected to wait. I sipped from a paper cup of water, steadying myself. At 2:37 they arrived. Derek in a fitted blazer too slim for his shoulders, Aubrey in a cream dress that looked ready for another round of photos. Their expressions changed when they stepped inside and saw the camera crew, the lawyer, the dean, the pastor. "Dad," Derek said slowly, looking around, "what's all this?" "This," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from me, "is where we're going to settle things." They hesitated but sat down. Aubrey's eyes darted toward the camera lens, then back at me. She adjusted her hair, smoothing it, already performing. I took a breath. "You asked me for the house. Today we're going to finalize its future." Relief washed over Derek's face. He thought he had won. Aubrey even allowed herself a small smile, like she'd already chosen curtains for the living room. But Evelyn was already pulling out the trust documents, laying them neatly on the desk. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice firm, but measured. "These papers formalize the transfer of this property into the Cole Home Craftsmanship Fund. It is a charitable remainder, unit rust irrevocable upon signature with a life estate granted to you." The words hung in the air. Irrevocable, charitable life estate. Derek blinked. "Wait, what?" Aubrey leaned forward, her smile faltering. "I'm sorry, what does that mean exactly?" Janelle tilted her microphone closer, the camera rolling steady. Evelyn explained again in plain English this time. "It means the house is no longer his to give to anyone. Not now, not ever. It will remain his residence until he passes. After that, it will be sold, and the proceeds will fund scholarships and apprenticeships for students entering skilled trades." For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Then Derek's voice cracked like a whip. "You can't just give away my inheritance." The words came out sharper than he realized, but the cameras caught every syllable. Aubrey reached for his arm, whispering something under her breath, but he pulled away. "Your inheritance," I repeated quietly. "Son, this house isn't yours to inherit. It's mine to decide what it means." Aubrey's cheeks flushed red. "This ruins everything we've been planning. Do you even understand what this does to our future, to our brand?" Her word echoed in my ears. Brand, not marriage, not family, brand. I turned toward the camera. "This is exactly why I made this choice, because a house isn't a brand. It's work, it's sweat, it's dignity, and it should mean more than filters and image." Derek stood suddenly pacing, running his hand through his hair. "You blindsided us. You brought us here to humiliate us on television." "No," I said evenly, my voice steady. "I brought you here to show you that inheritance isn't about taking. It's about giving. And it's about what you do with what you're given. I've given you years of opportunity. I've given you chances I never had. But you still haven't learned what matters. So now I'm giving this house to something bigger than either of us." The cameraman zoomed in on Derek's face. Anger, disbelief, maybe even fear flickered across it. Aubrey broke the silence with a hiss. "This is betrayal." "No," I said again, firmer this time. "This is clarity." Evelyn slid the documents closer to me. The pen gleamed under the overhead light. I picked it up slowly, my hand steady despite the weight of what I was about to do. I looked once at Derek. His eyes searched mine, maybe for hesitation, maybe for a crack he could exploit. But there wasn't one. Then I signed, my name in bold ink across the first page, the second, the third. Each stroke of the pen was like laying another beam in place, framing a structure that would outlast us all. When I finished, Evelyn stamped the papers. The sound echoed like a hammer on steel. Final. Binding. Done. Aubrey gasped. Derek slumped back into his chair. Janelle leaned forward with her microphone. Mr. Cole, why make this decision now? I looked directly at the lens, because inheritance isn't about passing down walls. It's about passing down values, and values only live if you protect them. Behind me, Marta's eyes shimmered with tears. Pastor Briggs nodded quietly as if in prayer. Across the table, my son sat silent, stunned. Aubrey shook her head, muttering under her breath about ruined plans, about wasted time. But I didn't hear her anymore. All I heard was the sound of my own heart steady sure. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. The pen was still warm in my hand when Evelyn slid the second copy of the trust papers across the desk. Her eyes met mine, steady, professional, but carrying a question. Are you ready to make this permanent? I was. I leaned forward again, the paper smooth under my palm. The cameras adjusted their angle, the red light blinking steady. Janelle gave a small nod. Her microphone tilted close enough to catch the sound of pen on paper. My name flowed across the page. One line, then another. With each stroke, the weight on my chest lifted even as the gravity of what I was doing deepened. This was the point of no return. When I set the pen down, Evelyn pressed her stamp firmly onto the bottom corner. The click and release of the seal echoed like a verdict. Final. Irrevocable. This is outrageous. Derek's voice cracked through the room. He shoved back his chair, the legs screeching against the tile floor. His hands balled into fists, face, red chest, rising and falling like a man cornered. You just gave away our house. There it was. The slip. The tell. I looked directly at him, then turned to the camera. Did you catch that? I asked softly. The cameraman gave a tiny nod. He had. Our house. I repeated, my voice quiet but sharp. He called the home. I built the home. I paid for our house. And yet he's never made a single mortgage payment, never fixed a leaking roof, never laid a single board in these walls. The silence after my words felt heavy, the kind of silence where everyone in the room knows something has shifted. Aubrey leaned forward, her voice sharp and thin. You can't do this. This isn't fair. You're destroying our future. Fair? I asked. My gaze drifted to her but didn't soften. Was it fair to marry my son in secret, to leave me out of the biggest day of his life? Was it fair to demand my house days later as though it were a trinket to be passed around? Was it fair to think of inheritance as entitlement rather than responsibility? She opened her mouth, then shut it again, lips pressing tight. Derek paced in a tight circle, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't get it, Dad. This isn't just about us, it's about opportunity, about building a future. I signed the final page of the second copy. Evelyn sealed it. The echo of the stamp cut his words short. You're right, I said quietly. It is about building a future, just not the one you imagined. The room grew still again. The camera lens gleamed, capturing every word, every twitch of anger, every tear threatening at the corner of Aubrey's eyes. I turned to Marta Ruiz, who had been sitting silently with her hands clasped. Dean, would you share what this fund will do? Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. This gift means dozens of young men and women will have the chance to train in skilled trades, electricians, plumbers, HVAC techs, carpenters. It means they'll graduate debt-free with tools in their hands and jobs waiting for them. It means futures where before there was only struggle. Pastor Briggs added softly, it means dignity. It means young people who never thought they had a chance will stand proud in work that matters. Their words filled the room with a weight heavier than money, heavier than property. Derek shook his head violently. Nobody cares about that. What about us? What about me? The words slipped out raw, jagged, and they were caught. Every syllable carved into tape, preserved for anyone who would ever watch. I looked at him, my son, the boy I raised, the man he'd become, and felt both sorrow and resolve. That's the difference, Derek, I said, my voice thick but steady. You're still thinking only about you. But legacy isn't measured in what you keep. It's measured in what you give. I picked up the pen one last time, signing the third and final copy. The ink gleamed wet for a moment, then dried into permanence. Evelyn sealed it with one firm press. It's done, she said quietly. The weight in the room shifted. Some looked relieved, others stunned. For me, it felt like the closing of a door I'd been staring at for too long. Derek collapsed back into his chair, his anger folding into disbelief. Aubrey turned away from the camera, covering her face with one manicured hand. Janelle leaned in, her voice professional but edged with curiosity. "Mr. Cole, do you realize this moment will air tonight? That people across the state and likely beyond will see exactly what you've done here?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I invited you." She raised an eyebrow. "Why make it public?" "Because lessons whispered in private can be ignored," I said. "But lessons spoken out loud, lessons recorded, become harder to escape." My eyes found Derek's again. He looked small, suddenly smaller than I'd ever seen him. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about punishing him. It was about holding up a mirror he could no longer avoid. Aubrey finally spoke again, her voice hoarse. "You'll regret this." I shook my head slowly. "No, I regret the years I confused love with enabling. I regret not teaching earlier what I should have. But this I will not regret." The cameras stayed trained on us, the red light unwavering. Outside the office window, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desk. I felt no fear, no hesitation, only peace. The deed was no longer mine. And in that surrender, I had finally secured what mattered most. That night, I sat alone in my living room with the television glowing against the walls I had built. The same walls Derek once plastered with his childhood drawings, the same ones that had heard every laugh, every argument, every silence over the years. Now they listened to the news anchor's voice telling the story of how I had just signed them away. Local contractor Raymond Cole, the anchor said, donated his $1.9 million Asheville home to establish a scholarship fund for skilled trades. The move was announced live at the county register's office with his son present, who had expected to inherit the property. Tensions ran high, but the donation is now legally binding and irrevocable. Then came the footage. The camera cut to Derek's face as he shouted, "You just gave away our house." The words scrolled across the bottom of the screen in bold letters, "Our house." Aubrey's sharp tone echoed through the speakers, "You're destroying our future." And then my own voice, calm and steady. Inheritance isn't about taking, it's about giving. I didn't need to watch the rest to know what would happen. Clips like that spread fast. By morning they had. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some supportive, some scathing. Strangers from across the country sent emails thanking me for finally standing up to entitlement. Others accused me of being cold, of humiliating my own blood. Family first, they wrote, as though family meant enabling every bad decision. The comments online came in waves. On one post, people praised the decision, calling it the kind of story America needs. On another, they called me heartless, accusing me of grandstanding. But buried in the noise were the stories that mattered most. Messages from young apprentices who said they'd dropped out because they couldn't afford tools. Fathers who admitted they'd been afraid to set boundaries with their kids. Mothers who said they were reconsidering what inheritance meant in their own families. The story wasn't just about me anymore. It had become a mirror for everyone else. By noon, Janelle Hart's segment had gone viral. News outlets picked it up across state lines. Headlines spun the story in every direction. Father donates $1.9 million house instead of giving it to entitled son. Contractor chooses community over family drama. Local man's irrevocable gift sparks national debate on inheritance. Each headline felt like a hammer driving the point deeper into the public conscience. Meanwhile, donations began pouring into the fund. Evelyn called to tell me that within the first 24 hours, more than $60,000 had been pledged by individuals who saw the broadcast. Tool companies reached out offering equipment. A construction firm in Charlotte volunteered to sponsor apprenticeships. It was bigger than I had dared imagine. But for Derek and Aubrey, the fallout was immediate and brutal. Aubrey lost 2 brand sponsorships within a week. One cookware company pulled her name from an upcoming campaign after the clip of her saying, "This ruins our brand," circulated online. People didn't want their products tied to entitlement and arrogance. She posted tearful videos on her channel blaming the media for twisting her words, but the internet doesn't forgive easily. Derek fared no better. A local marketing firm that had considered hiring him withdrew the offer. They cited unprofessional conduct, but I knew the truth. They didn't want the stain of the video attached to their name. His so-called consulting business crumbled overnight. Clients disappeared. No one wanted advice from the man the internet had labeled as the son who demanded a house. The calls I got from them in those first days were full of fury. Derek accused me of destroying his life. Aubrey accused me of sabotage, but I didn't answer after the first few. Let the silence speak where my words couldn't. I spent those evenings walking the yard. The oak tree swayed in the breeze, the same one that had held Derek's swing years ago. The grass glowed faintly in the moonlight. I thought about how fragile reputation could be, how quickly the public could lift or crush you. But unlike them, I wasn't chasing reputation. I was building legacy. Within a week, Pastor Briggs invited me to speak at Sunday service, not to defend myself, but to explain the heart behind the gift. I stood before the congregation, calloused hands resting on the pulpit, and told them what I had told the cameras, that inheritance is not about what you take, but about what you pass forward, that a home is not measured by square footage, but by the lives it touches. When I finished, there was silence, then applause, not the kind that feels like noise, but the kind that feels like agreement. Afterward, a boy of about 16 approached me. His clothes were worn, his hands rough with the beginnings of labor. He said, "Mr. Cole, I want to be an electrician, but my mom can't afford the tools. Will your fund help kids like me?" I put a hand on his shoulder. That's exactly who it's for. I went home that day feeling lighter than I had in years. But the backlash didn't stop completely. Extended family called me selfish. My ex-wife said I had gone too far, that I'd humiliated Derek beyond repair. Even some old friends shook their heads, warning me that I'd driven a wedge too deep to ever heal. Maybe they were right, or maybe healing sometimes requires a wound to be cleaned, no matter how painful. Late one night, as the donations climbed past $100,000, I sat at my desk and flipped back through the notebook where this all began. I read the list of values again. Pride in honest work. Respect for what's been earned. Gratitude for what's given. Responsibility for your own choices. Legacy built in service, not selfishness. Those words had become my compass. They were what the house truly represented. And now, with every dollar pledged, with every message sent, they were becoming real for others too. I closed the notebook and looked out the window at the dark outline of the mountains. Somewhere out there, Derek and Aubrey were licking their wounds, blaming me. Blaming the cameras, blaming anyone but themselves. But I knew the truth. The world had only seen what was already there. And sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones you can't outrun once the spotlight finds you. 6 months is not a long time in the span of a life, but it's long enough for the shape of a story to change. By fall, the Cole Home Craftsmanship Fund had grown from a seed into something real. The first group of 24 apprentices stood proudly in the workshop at Blue Ridge Community College, their new toolkits lined up on benches like treasures. Each bag had been purchased with the fund's money hammer, tape measure, pliers, wrenches, protective gear, all the basics to start a career. I was there the morning they opened them. Some of the kids were only 18, others already in their 20s after years of dead-end jobs. One boy with calloused hands cradled his toolkit like it was made of gold. A girl with braids tied back carefully zipped hers shut, whispering that it was the first thing she'd ever owned that no one could take from her. I stood at the edge of the room, heart heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because I thought of Derek, how different things might have been if he had stood in a room like this years ago. Light because even if he hadn't, others still could. Dean Marta caught my eye and nodded, her face flushed with pride. This, she said quietly, is what your house became. That night, I walked home through the crisp air, leaves crunching underfoot. I sat on the porch looking at the house and realized it felt different now. Not smaller, not less mine, but bigger than it had ever been. It was no longer just walls and roof. It was a living promise stretching out into the lives of kids I might never meet. But as the fund grew, Derek's life shrank. I heard things, of course. Word travels in a town this size. Aubrey's influencer deals had dried up. Their carefully curated image of elegance was gone. They had moved into a smaller apartment after defaulting on their lease. And then, the final blow, Aubrey left. A friend of Derek's told me she'd packed her things in the middle of the night, left a note about needing stability, and never came back. Her social media feeds showed her in Miami 2 weeks later, posing in rented condos, smiling like nothing had ever happened. Derek, meanwhile, was adrift. He lost whatever consulting work he had. No one wanted to be tied to his name. He picked up part-time shifts at a warehouse, moving boxes to cover rent. For a man who once measured himself by image and optics, it must have felt like exile. And yet that was the space where truth often seeps in. It started small. A Saturday afternoon, I was working on a railing repair at the college workshop when I heard the sound of hesitant footsteps. I looked up, and there he was, Derek. His hair was unkempt, his blazer replaced with a faded hoodie. He looked older than 27 eyes, hollow from nights of restless sleep. "I came to help," he said, simply, voice low. I didn't say anything at first. I handed him a drill. He took it awkward in his grip, but he didn't put it down. He followed instructions from one of the instructors, learned how to hang drywall, drilled screws into studs, wiped sweat from his forehead. For 3 hours, he worked without a single complaint. Not for cameras, not for show. Just work. When he left, he didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't argue. He just slipped an envelope onto the workbench. Inside was $400 in cash, folded neatly with his name written on the front. No note, just the money. I didn't touch it for a while. I stood there staring, realizing it was the first time he had ever given instead of asked. Weeks passed, and he kept showing up. Sometimes Saturdays, sometimes evenings. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was mostly questions about tools or techniques. He never mentioned the house, never brought up the cameras or the fund. He just worked. It was slow contrition, the kind that doesn't arrive with apologies, but with action. And though I didn't say it out loud, I felt a quiet shift inside me. I still hurt from what he had said. I still carried the sting of being excluded, of being treated as less than enough. But watching him haul drywall, seeing the blisters on his palms, I wondered if maybe finally he was learning the lesson that love hadn't been able to teach him. One night, after the workshop had emptied, I found him sitting on the steps staring at the floor. His shoulders sagged, his face pale. I sat beside him in silence. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, almost to himself, "I never knew it felt like this. To work all day and see something stand because of your hands." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself, to the boy he used to be, to the man he was finally becoming. When he left that night, he didn't look back, but I noticed his steps were steadier. At home, I pulled out the notebook again. Under the list of values, I added a 6th. Change comes not with words, but with work. I closed the book, placed it back on the shelf, and let the quiet of the house surround me. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Not certainty, not closure, but hope. And that I realized was enough to keep walking forward. Spring came late that year, but when it did, the mountains bloomed with color. Dogwoods lined the roads in white blossoms, and the smell of cut grass filled the air. It was on one of those bright April mornings that I found myself back at Blue Ridge Community College, standing in front of the second cohort of apprentices funded by the house I no longer technically owned. There were more of them now, 30 this time, lined up in brand new work boots, their eyes bright hands gripping toolkits engraved with the name Cole Fund. My name, yes, but more than mine. A name meant to carry forward something bigger. Dean Marta asked me to say a few words. I kept it simple. I told them that tools were more than metal and plastic, that they were keys. Keys to dignity, keys to independence, keys to a life no one could take away from them. When I finished, the room filled with applause. But what struck me most wasn't the noise. It was the look in their eyes, determination, gratitude, pride. That was the inheritance I wanted to leave behind. Later that afternoon, I was walking back to my truck when I saw Derek standing near the workshop doors. He was dressed plainly jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots that had seen honest wear. His hair was shorter now, his face leaner, his eyes quieter. "Can we talk?" he asked. We walked around the side of the building, away from the crowd. He shoved his hands in his pockets, staring at the ground for a long time before speaking. "I've been working at the warehouse still," he said, voice low. "But on weekends, I've been helping with the builds here. I like it." He paused. "I know that doesn't make up for everything, but I wanted you to know I'm trying." I studied him for a moment. There was no polish in his words, no sales pitch, no performance, just truth. He went on. "When you gave away the house, I thought you ruined me. I thought you were cruel. But now, I think maybe it was the only way I could learn. You didn't take my inheritance, Dad. You redefined it." His words sank deep. For months, I had hoped silently that he would understand. Hearing him say it aloud was like sunlight breaking through cloud. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I want to earn back your respect. One step at a time." I felt a lump rise in my throat. For so long, I had carried the weight of disappointment, of rejection. Now standing there in the soft spring air, I realized I didn't need an apology carved in marble. I needed what I was seeing, change slow but real. "You've still got a long road ahead," I said, my voice rough. "But respect isn't given. It's built. Just keep building." He nodded. No excuses, no protests, just a nod. A month later, he surprised me again. At the fund's annual dinner, where donors and apprentices gathered to celebrate, Derek asked if he could say a few words. I hesitated, unsure, but I let him. He stepped to the microphone, nervous, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm Derek Cole," he began, "and I'm the son of the man who gave away the house I thought was mine." A ripple of laughter moved through the room, gentle, not mocking. He swallowed. For a long time, I believed inheritance was about possessions, about what you get. But I've learned it's about what you do with what you've been given. And I've been given another chance to work, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than myself. There was silence when he stepped back. Then applause, long and warm. That night after the dinner, we sat on my porch together for the first time in years. The oak tree rustled above us, branches swaying gently. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The silence between us had shifted from cold distance to quiet peace. I thought back to the boy he once was sliding down the stair rail, laughing so loud it echoed through the halls. And I looked at the man beside me, now flawed, humbled, still finding his way. Maybe, just maybe, he was closer to the inheritance I had always hoped to give him. I realized then that I didn't regret a thing. Not the pain, not the public fallout, not the sleepless nights, because without them, Derek might never have found his footing. And without them, those apprentices would never have held tools in their hands, never stepped into futures with dignity. In the end, I hadn't lost a house. I had gained something far greater. Inheritance had been redefined. It wasn't about passing down walls and roofs. It was about passing down strength, work, ethic, service. It was about leaving the world a little better than you found it, even if it cost you comfort. And as I watched my son sit quietly beside me, I realized the greatest gift I could leave him wasn't the house he once demanded. It was the lesson that the only wealth that matters is the kind you give away. I leaned back, breathing deep the cool night air, and whispered a silent prayer of thanks for the house, for the fund, for second chances. This was inheritance. Not the kind written in deeds and titles, but the kind written in lives, changed values, lived love, tested and proven. A different kind of inheritance. The only kind worth leaving.